You're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Black Cat Publishing. I'm Mark.
I'm Francesca.
And we're here today to talk about They Hide, short stories to tell in the dark. Out now at Amazon.com and all your favorite places. Written by Black Cat Chronicles writer Francesca Maria. So we're here to bring you a little background, a little Q&A, a little fun and good times, like we always used to do here at Black Cat Publishing, and like we like to do with all the releases of our things. They Hide, short stories to tell in the dark, out now from Bridget's Gate Press.
Correct.
And so feel free to put your questions in the comments. And as I say, just going to bring a little bit of information, fun and good times about the book here to the public. Trying to get our technicals going over here.
There's always problems. Every single time there's problems.
Oh, the socials.
Yes. Keep talking.
So, well, we're here to talk to you about your book.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what is They Hide, short stories to tell in the dark?
I'm sorry, Facebook. So yeah, it is a story, a series of short stories, 13 tales in all around different horror tropes. So it's basically my love letter to horror. There's a witch story, a werewolf story, vampire story, ghost story, demon story, possession story, there's a couple possession stories in there. It's basically some of my favorite books to read are anthologies, like themed anthologies. In fact, I have some right here, where there's all different kinds of artists' takes on, like ghosts, for example.
Or just
Chock
straight
full.
up terror.
Or just straight up terror. And so I always wanted to write my own take. Like if I had to write a witch story, what would that look like? If I had to write a vampire story, what would that look like? And I thought about it during COVID, since, you know, everyone's locked down, we didn't have a lot to do. And I was thinking about how if I died tomorrow, as I think a lot of us were contemplating life and death during COVID, the early days, would I have any regrets? And the only regret I had was not, you know, writing this book that I've been thinking about for 20 some odd years, of a themed collection of short stories dedicated to different horror tropes. And so, as the great Neil Gaiman has said, you know, don't die with a book in you. I got out my laptop and started typing away, and They Hide is what came out of it.
So tell us a little bit more about the book. Okay, it's tropes, it's monsters, it's vampires, witches. Give us some insight into the book itself.
Sure. Each story has its own kind of origin, like where it came from, how I developed it. For those of you that don't know, I grew up in a haunted house, a legit haunted house. And so one of the stories in there, my brother Andy, is part autobiographical of some of the stuff that my siblings and I experienced growing up in a haunted house. Some of them were inspired by dreams I've had. Like there's one story called A Game of Ghost, where it's all epistolary. It's all letters and police reports and psychiatric reports of this little girl that goes missing. And I had this dream probably a decade ago of this little girl in a park climbing up a slide, going down the slide, and not coming out the bottom of the slide. Didn't know what that meant, but I had to just write the story to find out what the ending was. And so that one was inspired by a dream. Some of the others are just, you know, I just have this, you know, idea or just get a spark of something. And I'm not one of those plotters. I'm what you call a pantser. So I just kind of go with what I'm inspired by in the moment and let the characters and the stories kind of write themselves. So when I was writing the first draft for each of these, I didn't know the endings. I didn't know what was going to happen. In the first one, the Wisterfield murders, it starts with a murder. I had no idea who'd done it. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end. And I scared myself so much that I had nightmares from what I actually saw in my head and then eventually wrote down. And so hopefully some of these stories will inspire and frighten and give you nightmares in a good way.
So our viewers know you as the writer of Black Cat Chronicles, subtle plug, latest issue, Invasion Antarctica, out now, black-cat-publishing.com. Talk a little bit about the process. Talk a little bit about your writing process, how writing the short stories differs from the comic book writing, those sorts of things.
Sure, yeah.
Your creative process.
It's much different, but writing both helps each other. So when I write comics, I have to write very visually. I have to see the scene completely in my head so that I can write stage directions for the artist. So like I see, like for this particular issue, I had to see in my head, where's this one? Yeah. The black cat is looking into a kind of a hole in the Antarctic snow, and below it I'm seeing like the ocean view. So I kind of had to visually see all of it first, and then write, like I said, very detailed stage directions for the artist's daytime. Black cat's looking down the snow. There's all, the water is murky, and we see these creatures that they just kind of start piling up, and the word balloons are carrying it, going through as the little piggies, the little sea pigs are multiplying. And so that process of me having to really visualize every scene helps me in the short story writing, because I don't have those same visual cues. There's not an artist to paint the scene for you. So I have to make sure I'm writing the very details of the scene and the setting to make you feel like you're there. And so it's really helped, I think, my writing has helped enrich the whole, scene and setting and mood. Because, color in comics is also another way that we get cues as the mood and the emotion. So I had to find ways of writing about the color, the mood of each of these different scenes. So it's much different process, right? I'm not doing stage directions, obviously, in the short story collection, but I am doing a similar take for the reader where I'm kind of writing through, and now it's, dark and it's, cold and, negative 50 degrees outside and the wind's whipping out and the black cat is shivering. And so it's very similar in its end result, but a very different process. It's a very long-winded way of answering your question. Sorry.
That's right. I just know, a lot of our viewers and readers in general are interested in the artistic process and creating comics. And of course, creating short stories is very different. So, yeah. And not a lot of people do both or have a lot of success at both. A lot of artists sort of stick to what they do. So that range is really interesting. What are you hoping? What am I trying to say? What do you want the reader to get out of your book? What do you want the reader to come away with after reading They Hide?
That's a great question. Well, first and foremost, I hope it's fun and entertaining. I hope that it makes the reader uncomfortable when it needs to and comfortable when it needs to. But it's kind of like a Rorschach test. There's 13 very different stories, and hopefully there'll be something that resonates for everybody that picks up the book, whether it's one story, whether it's 3 of the stories, whether it's, resonates to me as something that kind of sticks with you, something that leaves an imprint or an emotion. I was talking about this the other day. I don't have a very good memory, so I can't, cite specific characters in, like, Stephen King's Salem Lot. I read that when I was probably 12 or 13. I can't relay the plot to you or the character names, but I can tell you how I felt. Like, I can tell you how, like, I remember reading it and being scared and riveted and like completely transported into this town that he created, and how haunting it was and how realistic it was and how it made me feel like I had to look over my shoulder at my neighbors to make sure they weren't the creepy vampire living next door. So that sense of an imprint, that like emotional, visceral reaction, that's what I strive for in my writing, mainly for myself, but also hopefully for the reader as well.
Good answer. Visceral response is always something. I think something the viewer wants to have. I think that's part of why we watch movies, read books, read comics, whatever it might be. You're looking for that emotional connection. So, why short stories? Why not take one of these stories and make a novel, right? The great American novel, as people like to say.
That terrifies me. So novel writing is extraordinarily intimidating. I've been writing short stories since I was 6 years old. The longest one I've written was maybe 20, 30 pages at the time. The Gathering, so the last story in They Hide, is a novella. It's the longest one in there, and I think it's about 20,000 words. So that's probably the longest thing I've ever written, and I loved it. But I kind of cheated because it's not one story; it's like several stories within the story. You'll get the gist of that. I writing comics, reading comics for as many years as I have, appreciate this sense of economy of words and getting to the point quick. So the training I've had, again, first and foremost, as a retailer of comics, as a reader of comics, as appreciation of this kind of print format, you're very limited to, you've got a certain number of pages, certain number of panels to convey a whole story start to finish. And so it's a really great way to make sure every single word counts, make sure there's a reason for every single thing. And to be honest, personally, most of the novels I read, I'm like, this should have been cut out. This is not necessary. This isn't helping the plot. This isn't helping to develop the character. Why am I reading this again? And so I'm more often than not disappointed in novels because, and God loves Stephen King. I love him. He needs to cut some of that stuff out. Anne Rice, a little too flowery. But my favorite stuff is Stephen King's short stories, Neil Gaiman's short stories. But Neil Gaiman is the exception to the rule. Every novel he's written is perfection. And so I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but the quick answer is it's intimidating for me. I don't know, honestly, that I've got the writing chops to do that yet. But I wouldn't hesitate to give it a shot in another couple of years.
Well, while we're on the subject, a couple of years. Well, let's not get into the future yet. We're still talking about what's out today. Where can folks find? I'll go back and how did we get here? You've had some other short stories. Talk a little bit about the contests and the things. And
sure. So also during COVID, I wanted to hone in on my craft and learn my craft. And so I joined the Horror Writers Association, my local chapter, met some phenomenal people, and got on their mentorship program. And so I had a mentor named Christy Noble who helped me quite a bit with, how do I submit stuff? Like, what is the submission process? What's the market like out there? And so for those of you that don't know, there's tons of anthology books, tons of magazines, tons of websites that are always open to open call submissions to writers submitting their work. And they're usually themed. They usually have a criteria of like 1,000 words to 6,000 words, themed around Salem witches, or themed around cosmic horror or body horror or something along those lines. And so I started, writing stories specifically for these open calls and submitting them, and I got quite a few rejections, as you do, but it kept me flexing different muscles and thinking about different things. And I also took a course that was extraordinarily helpful, level 1 and level 2, Fright Club by Mona Lawrence, which I can't really say much about because it's secret, but you can look up Fright Club online, and if you want to join, if you're a horror writer, it's where I cut my teeth. It's where I learned how to do certain things, and I got a lot of critique back from other horror writers, which was invaluable. And so I started, working more and understanding where my own blind spots were, where my own weaknesses were, and so I could fix them in editing. And as then I started submitting stuff again, I started to get acceptances. And one in particular, the first place that ever published me outside of our own self-publishing realm is a publisher named Crystal Lake Publishing. They're based out of South Africa, and they do this monthly shallow waters flash fiction contest with different themes, and it's about up to 1,500 words. So really short stories. And I just started submitting stuff, and they accepted it, and they would just start running it, and it would be then, like say 20 or 30 stories in a month that the publisher would select, and they would put it on their website, on their Patreon page. And then at the end of the month, the authors would, judge each other's work. And so in the process of doing that, I met some incredible authors who are super supportive. And some of them voted my stories for second or third place. So I've gotten a couple of those notches under my belt. And that gave me a lot of encouragement to keep going. So as I was writing They Hide and editing it, I was also on the side working on another series of short stories, and just kind of, again, honing in on my craft, trying to get better as a writer, trying to push myself a little bit more and flex different muscles. And so hopefully that comes through in They Hide.
And coming back to the book, so tropes. Why that as your anthology theme? Why the classic monsters as an angle of horror?
Because they're awesome. I mean, do I need anything more? Who doesn't love a good witch story, a good vampire story, a good werewolf story, a good mummy story?
Well, let me interject then.
Okay.
Because I know this comes up as the thing in comics.
Okay.
So how do you approach these things knowing that 100,000 stories have already been written? How do you sit down to write a vampire story in a world where everybody's already read 1,000 vampire stories?
That was the whole point and the whole challenge of the collection is, do I have something new to say? What is my perspective on each of these horror tropes? Can I do something new, or can I push myself and create something that I haven't seen before? And so, some people might disagree. Some people might look at it and say it's all derivative, and they might not see that it's a fresh new take. But for me, like for instance, the vampire story is more about a Renfield type character than it is about the vampire itself. And I didn't realize that's what I was writing until the first draft was done, and I took a step back. I'm like, oh, it's actually about this other guy. It's not really about the vampire. And so that threw me for a loop, because my intention going into it was to write a vampire story, and I did, but it was from a different perspective on it.
Then what's and obviously you wrote. Oh, I'll answer add my own answer to that question really quick.
Yeah.
The mummy story I found really fascinating. I thought that was that, and you have a couple in there. The werewolf story comes to mind. I don't want to spoil anything or even give away much of anything because I want you all to buy and love the book. But I found they were very fresh perspectives while remaining what you want to see in those stories. There are certain elements in a werewolf story that you sort of have to have. And I think, again, why I mentioned comics, I've seen 1,000 writers talk about writing Batman and writing Superman, and the challenge of taking on these iconic characters taking on these ideas that so many great writers have already done.
Mhm.
And I think writing horror tropes can be a little like that. Like I say, a werewolf story, for example, has to have a full moon and it has to have this and that.
Mhm.
So how do you include those elements without making it a story that everybody's seen 1,000 times? And again, I think you do a great job with that, particularly with the mummy story. It has all the elements that you need to see from a mummy, and yet brings so much backstory, so much thought that you hadn't thought about before. And that's really so. What's your personal favorite trope? What's the not just in what you but what do you like to write about? What's the classic monster that you could fill 10 short story, 10 anthologies with?
You know, so growing up Catholic, and it is Easter weekend. I'm not practicing Catholic any longer, but that's still very much embedded in my DNA and my bloodstream. Looking at the collection, I think there's more demon, Lucifer type stories than anything else in there, because that frightens me. You know, that was like growing up a legit fear of demonic possession, seeing The Exorcist too young, hearing about that in church and in school. I went to Catholic school as well. So I think I could probably, you know, if I had to take a stab at a novel, it would probably be something demonic possession, Satan related, because that really does frighten me. Do I believe in it? No. Do I think Satan's real? No. But do I believe there's some horrible evil out there that can take possession of people, and maybe it's just our own psyche losing control? Yeah, and that terrifies me. Whether it's some external force or something internally, possession is a terrifying topic that I think I could write more about.
Fascinating stuff. Certainly no end of the angles and perspectives in possession of these. I want to throw out there real quick. Feel free to give us your questions, comments, queries. We'd love to hear from you. Love to know your questions for Francesca and anything that you'd like to know about They Hide. You said something about having an announcement. There's aside from going to Amazon right now and get your ebook or get your paperback, there's an announcement you had.
Drum roll. Well, I don't want to shake up the table. So I'm really happy to announce that I've signed 2 incredibly talented actors to do the audiobook for They Hide. So They Hide, the print and the ebook, is being published by Bridget's Gate Press. Amazing husband and wife team who picked up They Hide and saw something in it and are taking a huge risk with publishing this gal. But the audiobook rights I own, and I've always loved audiobooks. I listen to them all the time whenever I'm cleaning the house or just doing stuff around, and so I thought it'd be neat if there's also an audiobook version for They Hide. So I've got 2 actors lined up. They're almost done recording. The clips are amazing, and we're going to be doing a Kickstarter for it pretty soon. We're going to wait for the print launch, which was yesterday, to kind of that dust to settle, and then I'm going to announce and publish a Kickstarter for the audiobook pretty soon. Very excited about that. And if you're on YouTube, you can check out some of the clips that are already on there. Lucy Kay is the female actor, and she is phenomenal. And then Spencer Dillahay is the male actor. Each has different stories that they're going to read. So like the witch story is going to be read by the female actor. The Game of Ghosts is going to be read by the male actor. So they don't interact. It's not like a radio show kind of thing, but they each have specific stories that they're going to read on their own, and they're blowing me out of the water right now. It's just incredible.
That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
So tell the folks at home all the great ways and places they can find your book, the places they can find you, and other material that you've got going on.
Can I brag real quick first?
You sure can.
So yesterday the book came out, like officially, and it went to #1 bestseller on Amazon's for horror short story new release on ebook. There's a lot of dots. But anyway, I was like 2 books away from Stephen King on the Amazon's list, like bestseller list. And at one point earlier in the week, I was one book away from Margaret Atwood's book. And I'm like, I gotta just like get that tattooed, like get that screenshot of the Amazon rankings. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how that works, or if I'm ever gonna see that again. And so I kind of want to have that memory seared into my head that for a brief moment in time, I was Stephen King adjacent. I was super excited about that. So yeah, francescamaria.com. There's no H in there. francescamaria.com is how you can find all of the stuff that I'm up to, including the short fiction that's outside of They Hide. You can find They Hide on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and you can ask your local bookstore to order it. You can ask your librarian to carry it. That would help me out a lot, actually. You could do that. But yeah, it's wherever you can get, books. It should be on the shelves.
And what's next? Well, you got.
Yes. So once the Kickstarter for the audiobook takes off, I'm going to get back to writing the next issue of the Black Cat Chronicles, Portland Underground. This is such a horrific story, true story of men going to bars, getting way liquored up, and a literal trap door under their stool would take them to this underground cave system in Portland, Oregon, where they were then, the term was shanghaied, put on a boat while they were still kind of drunk, and ended up being slave labor on ship routes between the western coast of the United States, San Francisco and Seattle and Portland and Shanghai and the Asian ports on that end. And the horror stories of the men and the women that were kind of in this underground brothel, opium den, kidnapping, human trafficking, all of that stuff is what I'm going to be diving into next with Black Cat Chronicles issue number 4 now.
Yep, getting into our 4th issue.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff. You're a busy woman.
I am indeed. What about Black Cat Publishing? Anything else going on?
Well, as we've been talking about this, it's scratching at my brain that maybe They Hide Short Stories to Tell in the Dark needs to have a graphic novel adaptation. Either of the whole book or maybe just particular stories. We'll let the readers and the fans tell us what they think after they get their copies.
One of the stories in there, it's The Legend of the Chupacabra. I wrote that story for our Black Cat Tales line for the comic series, which we haven't been able to kick off just yet, which is where Black Cat Chronicles is our true horror fiction. Black Cat Tales is our foray into fiction stories. And so I do have that story ready to go. I can very easily put that into a script when we're ready to launch that.
There you go. But yes, certainly you can find Black Cat Publishing, black-cat-publishing.com.
Mm-hmm.
Pick up the latest issue, Invasion Antarctica. Pick up the previous 2 issues if you've missed them, Greyfriars Cemetery and
what have you been up to since we've last connected? What's Mark Kazi from Black Cat Publishing been up to?
Mark,
still reading comics?
Yes. So just really quick. Mark Kazi from Black Cat Publishing, when he's not editing these books, is enjoying his early retirement from his retail store, and I'm very grateful to all of our fans and all of our viewers and everything who continue to support us and support our comic.
And all of our wacky ideas.
And all of our wacky ideas. Be on the lookout for the return of Kazi's classics.
Oh.
I know some of you, maybe not as many of you as I think, but 1 or 2 of you out there might be missing some of my video shows. It scratches at my brain to do the new weekly videos, but I certainly will be getting back to doing Kazi's classics. So if you are a fan of Kazi's classics and you want to see that come back, go to the Facebook page, go wherever, and say, hey, bring back Kazi's classics, or just keep up with us, and I'll be bringing that back because it was a lot of fun. And I really miss doing that. But for the most part, no, I'm I'm just enjoying reading comics and my collection and doing all the things that old comic book guys do.
That's awesome. Rebagging and boarding.
Rebagging and boarding. That's what I'm doing. I'm rebagging and boarding.
It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Like when you're done with one end, you start again on the other end and start.
And finding all the gems in the collection you forgot about and all those sorts of things. But we're not here to talk about me and comics. We're here to talk about you and They Hide and short stories to tell in the dark.
I will be at the Bay Area Book Festival signing books at the Horror Writers Association booth on Sunday, May 7th, 6th, 7th. I'll also be on a horror panel that day. I think it's the history of horror. I can't remember exactly the title, but it's all free. So you're more than welcome to show up if you're in the Bay Area and local. That's going to be in Berkeley in the Martin Luther King Square Park. And you can do a Google search for the panel. It's also on my website, francescamaria.com.
There you go. So go to... Very fine. Go to bn.com, go to Amazon, get They Hide, short stories to tell in the dark, the new horror anthology by Francesca Maria, brought to you by Bridget's Gate. I want to thank Bridget's Gate Press for all of their awesomeness. Pick up a copy of They Hide, short stories to tell in the dark. Go to black-cat-publishing.com, pick up a copy of the latest issue or all the issues of Black Cat Chronicles, and stay tuned for more from Francesca Maria. Thanks for watching. It's great to see you, folks.
Thanks, guys.